Here is a live look from New Hampshire as voters are making their way to the polls today for the first in the nation primary. The race for the Republican presidential nomination is down to former President Donald Trump and former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley. I want to thank you all so much for joining me here at the live desk. I am Janae Hancock, and we are joined by Deborah Leiter, who is a political science professor at UMKC. Deborah, thank you so much for joining me here at the live desk. How's it going?
Going really well. Always an exciting day in political science.
Yeah, you all have a lot to talk about. And speaking of political science, I believe the last time we spoke was ahead of the first Republican debate last year. And obviously this year is a big year as far as the presidential election at the end of 2024. So let's get straight into the conversation. We are receiving live updates from CNN. And I do want to touch on this. Nikki Haley, she was speaking to reporters outside of a polling place in New Hampshire earlier this morning. And she said, "I don't do what he tells me to do," in response to Trump's suggestion to drop out. She says that she is going to fight to the end. So, Deborah, bringing the attention back to you, what can we expect from the primary today?
Well, this is a really important moment for Nikki Haley. This is the first time, it's worth noting, that Donald Trump has ever had a one-on-one primary contest. And today is a day where Nikki Haley needs to outperform expectations. A surprise victory would certainly change the dynamics, but if the election is close, it shows that there is a potential for this primary to really change direction. And that's a really different story than we've been talking about for the last several months, where Donald Trump has looked like the presumptive nominee.
And you talk about changing direction. We've seen a lot of changes just within the last few days with Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. He dropped out of the race on Sunday, and then he went on to endorse former President Donald Trump. Now, do you believe that his supporters, DeSantis I'm talking about, will kind of switch over to Trump? Or do you believe that maybe they can switch sides and go over to Nikki Haley?
I suspect there's going to be both directions. Some DeSantis supporters really supported DeSantis because he was following a similar ideological line to Donald Trump. Other people preferred DeSantis because they didn't like Donald Trump. And so I think we're going to see about an even split of DeSantis voters, those who really liked him, those who really appreciated him following his recommendation or endorsement. But I think there's going to be a fair number of those voters who preferred a different candidate to Donald Trump, who will move to Nikki Haley as an alternative.
And we just received this new update. Like I said, we are getting them currently from CNN. This is coming in from Senator Joe Manchin, and he went on to express some frustration that so many Republicans had dropped out of their primary, making a Trump and Biden rematch even more likely. So again, I want to take another live look from New Hampshire as voters are starting to put in their votes today for that primary. Deborah, if you can just kind of break down more, what is at stake today?
Absolutely. So the New Hampshire primary is the first primary in the nation. We have the Iowa caucuses, but this is the first primary. And primary elections have much higher turnout than caucuses, and New Hampshire is a larger state. So many eyes are turned to New Hampshire as a sign to see if voters have made up their mind or not. New Hampshire is a good state for Nikki Haley. Nikki Haley tends to perform well amongst more educated voters. She tends to perform well with independents, where independents can vote in the New Hampshire primaries. So part of the reason we're paying so much attention, of course, is that it's first, but also this is a contest that should benefit Haley, and we really need to see if she can perform well amongst those voters that she's been polling better with.
And, I want to touch on this as well. If we're speaking about the latest polls and what they're showing, former President Donald Trump, he has 50% of the support right now among likely Republican primary voters in the state. And Haley is sitting right now at 39%. Now, does Haley need to win or come in close second tonight? How does that pan out?
She absolutely must come in close second. If it's a blowout, if it's 20 points, 20%, loss to Donald Trump, that's going to be really hard for her to come back from. If she polls a close second place, then that tells a different story, especially because really she's only had about a week to be the only candidate facing Donald Trump. Going back to your comment about Joe Manchin, Senator Manchin, he expressed his frustration that so many Republican candidates have dropped out. But in fact, actually only having one alternative candidate to Donald Trump makes it slightly more likely for him to lose the primary competition. So that's part of the reason there's so much attention, is that this has now become a one versus one person race.
And you say a one versus one person race, but we also have to just touch on the fact that several South Carolina GOP politicians have now endorsed former President Donald Trump. And just to give our viewers a list of that, is we're talking about Representative Nancy Mace, Senator Tim Scott, who was there last night, and we're also talking about Governor Henry McMaster. Do you think that this will have a major impact on the results tonight? All of those people who are from South Carolina, where Nikki Haley was former governor, do you think that will have an impact on that?
Endorsements matter. People do listen, and particularly, I think, having your own home state politicians speak in support of another candidate is something that does hurt. Certainly, a number of people on that list are people also running for vice president, kind of quietly, so voters are aware of that. But what Nikki Haley really needs to win is a really strong sense of endorsement from mainstream Republican elites, and we're not seeing that strong message. Instead, we're seeing the party either split or sort of tacitly or explicitly moving towards Donald Trump, I think in part just to try to end the spending that they're needing to do in these primary elections. These primaries are becoming very expensive.
Okay, so let's kind of look ahead to the future. If we're doing if for both, if Nikki Haley were to pull out a win and really defeat former President Donald Trump tonight, what does that mean looking ahead to the presidential election at the end of this year in November?
So were Nikki Haley to win the actual nomination, that would fundamentally change the 2024 race. Right now, we see Joe Biden and Kamala Harris out campaigning against Donald Trump. That has been the message. That has been their strategy this entire time. And facing Donald Trump and his particular brand of politics is a really different story than facing someone like Nikki Haley, who is younger, who is female, who is perceived as a more classic traditional Republican. So it would upend the race entirely. If she doesn't necessarily win, but the primary is long and protracted, that makes the campaign for Donald Trump much harder once the general election occurs. He's had to spend more money, and primaries can be a pretty bruising affair. You can dig up a lot of dirt being thrown at you from your own side. So in either case, either Haley winning or Haley dragging the primary competition out would change the 2024 general election dynamic in some really interesting ways.
And you talk about the fact that she is younger. She has really used that to her advantage during her campaign, and she is really pointed at the fact of how old President Biden is, as well as former President Donald Trump. And I know a lot of people, a lot of voters have really spoken out and said that they do not want to see that rematch, Biden and Trump again. Now, again, let's turn our direction back to former President Donald Trump. If he were to take away the win tonight, what does that mean looking ahead to the presidential election at the end of this year?
A really solid win tonight would help him turn his attention to the general election, which is primarily where he has been focusing his attention. Donald Trump has a number of challenges for 2024, including the large number of indictments that he's facing, questions about whether he's actually eligible to run based on the 14th Amendment. He really needs to spend his time convincing voters that he is the better candidate than Joe Biden. And so being able to win tonight and win handily likely means that he can turn his attention to the general election.
And President Biden is actually not on the ballot in New Hampshire today, but what happens if people write him in? I know that there have been a lot of videos of people standing on the side of the roads really kind of protesting, hoping that others write him in on the ballot.
Absolutely. So the Democratic Party decided to change the calendar for how the primaries worked. New Hampshire decided not to participate. And so today actually is an interesting primary in that the winner of the Democratic primary will not actually send any delegates to the Democratic National Convention. But a win for Biden here would be a really strong start for him. So winning a primary where you're not actually running does show that more Democratic voters are behind him than sometimes we hear about, right? We hear a lot about the dissension with Joe Biden, but him winning this primary would be a strong signal that at the end of the day, voters will turn out to vote for him.
And we just received another update before I let you go here, Deborah. As voting gets underway in New Hampshire, we know that Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris, they are campaigning together for the first time in 2024 on abortion rights in Virginia. And I told you yesterday earlier before we hopped on the live stream that Harris was in Wisconsin yesterday, and she really was targeting former President Donald Trump. Now, I know that they are really focusing on abortion rights. Do you feel like that is a smart move to really kick off their campaign trail this year?
This is certainly a majorly salient issue, and we definitely saw that play out in the midterm elections in 2022. We saw that play out in a number of referenda that have been held across the country, including over in Kansas. Abortion is an issue that has become salient and is also representative of a general frustration about social policies. And certainly, this is an area where I think the Biden camp has an advantage that they can point to as the sort of importance of maintaining control of the presidency by pointing to the Dobbs decision and overturning Roe v. Wade, which occurred in part due to the replacement of justices under the Trump campaign, or excuse me, Trump presidency. So certainly this does appear to be a winning issue. And while some people have asked whether this will be continue to be a salient issue, it doesn't appear to be off of people's minds. And the Democrat strategy for 2024 is going to be to focus on those issues that generally have high levels of public support.
Deborah, before I let you go here today, is there anything else that you would like to add to this interview?
I just want to tell folks to keep paying attention that while this particular election, the primary may end quickly, there's still quite a lot of primaries to go.
And you touch on a good point there. While this primary is happening in New Hampshire today, we definitely have all of our eyes on it because it is going to impact us in the end, especially as we look ahead to the 2024 presidential election. Deborah, I want to thank you so much for joining me here at the Live Desk.
Thank you so much for having me.